Hello, everybody. Welcome back. So today, today I'm going to be talking to you about two shows that I put together that kind of frame my understanding of value, and I'm doing that as a way of giving you a little bit of an inroads into why I thought teaching a course like this would be important, but also where I'm coming from. And so as you go through the material that I'm assigning you and all these readings, they're, especially now that we're in this terrain where we're switching things around quite a bit, and we're hopping from topic to topic, it might seem as though they're kind of disconnected. And so in the explanation of these two exhibitions, I am hoping that you will get a sense of how I'm thinking about this stuff and why the readings I've assigned are deemed important or valuable to our discussion. So, I've titled today's lecture "Curating as Valuation," because essentially that is what a curator is doing, right? A curator, in today's sense of the term, is somebody who has an idea, comes up with the thesis, and then presents that thesis to a public through a conversation between objects. And so the thesis is important, but the curator relies on the content and the material presented by the artists and the authors. And for the rest of today's lecture, I'm going to be referring to author instead of artist or creator or maker, because I want to connect the idea of all of this cultural production to ideas, to thinking, to the concept, right? Because it's the concept of these works that string them together, or the way that they perform, the objects themselves, the way that these objects perform, that string them together and bolster the idea that is put forth. Now, I am talking to you about my work, and so, in as much as I'm bashful about it, I also want to parlay a sense of, I always think it's awkward when professors assign a book that they wrote as the text, because they're framing the entire conversation in their own words. I'm going to try as hard as I can not to do that. I'm really doing this lecture as case studies in the way that someone, myself, in one instance, and myself and my husband John in another instance, the way that we thought about these ideas and the way that we brought them together and presented them to a public. And so, without any further ado, we're going to just get things rolling. The first show that I would like to talk to you about is titled "Within a Tournament of Value." And this show is currently on view at Flux Factory. And so that space that we all congregated in, the gallery at Flux Factory, is the space of this exhibition. And rather than give you some cohesive installation shot, I'm just going to go through and talk about the sculptures, because the sculptures that I have brought together for this show, in some instances commissioned for this show, tell the story and present a really nice conversation. And I think I can do that without belaboring it with installation shots. So I do want to start off with this frame here. This was the flyer, quote unquote. I mean, it's not really a flyer. We didn't publish these things and pass them out, but it's designed to be a quick understanding, kind of like the card that you would pass out for another exhibition. There is a press release with a lot of other words, but this is the thing that I put together specifically because I wanted to present a little bit of a mystery. I kind of generally do that as a curator. I like making my audience think in as much as I like teaching for that very reason. I can elicit a conversation. I can be there to help string the conversation along, but I can also give you the information and allow you the ability to process it in your own terms, and then our conversation after that is made much richer, right? Made much more valuable. So the list of artists here, you are going to recognize one person on that list. His name is Peter Semensky. He was one of the artists that I worked with on this exhibition, and we're going to talk about his work in just a second. But a moment ago I said that I was going to be referring to all of these people as authors. If I was using Bourdieu's terminology, I would be referring to these people as cultural producers. But I like the idea of author. There's something that I enjoy about that term. I understand it might be a little outdated, but whatever. So this list of people: Arjan Apatera, Jean Baudrillard, Pierre Bourdieu, Marcel Mauss, Grant McCracken, Ryan McGinnis, Roman Ondak, Vance Packard, a collective of authors pulled together under the title Notes on Value, Dana Sherwood, Peter Semensky, Julia Wiest, Thorsten Veblen, and Olav Veltius. So you can see that this show is a nice mirror to the conversations that we've been having in class. Granted, what we've been talking about has been really specific to the art market. This show is organized around the latter half of our term, where we're talking about alternative modes of valuation. So these are all the people that I was in conversation with, that I was examining in the build-up to this show. And all of these people have some sort of work on view in the gallery space. Now, for, say, Pierre Bourdieu, I obviously don't have a drawing by him. He's not a visual artist. He like Baudrillard, like Apatera, like Grant McCracken, who you're going to be reading after this lecture. These are all authors in the sense that they use words to convey meaning. The visual artists are intermixed with this. All of these producers are listed in alphabetical order so as to not give them any sort of privilege. Because inasmuch as the artworks that are brought into the space and put on view are important and are the thing that are going to attract a lot of the audience's attention, all of these people are being, as the subtitle here, a salon considering works by, all of these people are considered in the development of this exhibition. And in this space, I've actually installed a couch and a table, which I'll show you in just a moment, with these texts. And I invite the audience to sit down, to peruse these texts after seeing the works, before seeing the works, however they feel or they see fit. And so this show is basically what a curator would do, or traditionally what a curator would do. I guess is the easiest way to say this. They would read these authors, and then they would find the artworks, and they would put the artworks in view, and they would come up with some sort of catalog essay using those the textual authors as a bibliography, as citation material, right? Because this show, the nature of this show, is in conversation with issues of obsolescence and conspicuous consumption and the caveat emptor, the buyer beware clause, I did not want to have a catalog essay that could exist in perpetuity well after the show. Instead, I wanted the exhibition to have an air of obsolescence in and of itself. And so rather than have something that, like a catalog, that can be historicized and put in a very specific place to be looked at and examined later in its entirety, I wanted the audience who experienced these works to have it be a fleeting interaction with these objects, to have their experience actually obsolesce, in as much as memory can vacate your mind, right? And so all of these artists and all of these textual authors are actually working in conversation, in concert with each other. And that's something that I didn't want to hide behind the role of the curator. Instead, I wanted to be the caretaker for all of the objects, the books included, and present them to a public and also present myself in the room during a specific period of time. I sit in the gallery for 3 hours every day for the full run of the show. And during that time, I have the door wide open, so people come in. They're not necessarily typical art viewers. Sometimes they're people that are asking for directions, but they linger in the space. We have a conversation, and they walk out having an experience that they might not have even imagined they were going to have on that day. So that has a lot to do with the fact that this project is presented by my curatorial project, the Institute for American Art. And you can see down there, the byline there is a conversation afforded by the National Endowment for the Arts, who's responsible for the funding of the show, Flux Factory, who's responsible for the placement and the staging of the show, and also for my residency, and also the Institute for American Art, which is my curatorial nom de plume. And I'll talk about the Institute more specifically a little bit later, even though I know some of you are very familiar with it. So, getting to the works. This is as close as I have to what is regarded as a traditional installation shot, because here you can actually see 3 of the sculptural works that are in the show, as well as the entire collection of books. Those books are resting on a table. That table, I basically, up until 2 weeks ago, I would sit and read those books on a couch in Flux Factory's library. I would put my feet on this table while I perused these texts and made my underlines and prepared not only for our semester, but also for this exhibition, primarily for this exhibition. And so I wanted, in establishing a sense of continuity with my practice at home in Portland, Maine, where I have a museum in my house, I wanted to bring the domestic into the gallery in some capacity. So, although this is a 3-dimensional object that sits in the space in the same way that the couch is, neither of those two things are necessarily regarded as art objects. They are meant to be part of the experience of the space, and so this table is the way that I display the books that I've used as my reference material. In the back, we have 2 plants that are actually there only to help support a sculpture that I'm going to talk about in a moment. To the right-hand side, we have a pedestal on top of which is another sculpture. And in the far back, you can see a small red dot appearing in a window. And that is also a sculptural work that we're going to talk about in just a moment. But first, a little bit of a home team advantage. I want to talk to you about Peter Semensky. Peter Semensky, as many of you know, is a sculptor primarily based in New York, and obviously he teaches at the Maine College of Art. For a project that he did a year ago with Cabinet Magazine, he released a measure of gold dust over the magazines that were going to be sent to the people that subscribed. And it's a very interesting project because basically he was given the opportunity to present a project with Cabinet Magazine. They told him he had this much money and that it would be on this page of the magazine, which traditionally would sell for the X, like he has X amount of money in his budget, there's Y amount of money for the ad space in the actual printed magazine. And so Semensky turned the market value of the page in Cabinet Magazine into a measure of gold dust. He then dispersed that gold dust over the magazines, thereby having a kind of a physical but also an obsolescing sense of the actual value buried within the magazine, right? So this individual page, let's just say it's $500 for an ad, even though I know it's much more than that. but for our conversation that works. So there's $500 for that somebody has to pay to Cabinet Magazine in order to publish an ad in their in the book. Semensky took that number, that $500, and took it out of the abstract. Instead of it being this number that exists in almost entirely in text, he turned it into the quantifiable, the most standard way that we have equated monetary value, which is a measure of gold. But a measure of gold totaling $500 isn't actually that much gold, and so there's no way he could have gold leafed a page. There's no way he could have done something that was more grand. And actually that wasn't the point. What he wanted to do was have something that was very subtle, so that when the magazine arrives at someone's home, they are going to open the plastic, and actually the gold dust is going to then expand into their house, possibly fall onto their lap. It might end up on their fingertips. And so they are given a very physical manifestation of the exchange value of one of the aspects of this magazine. Now, for our purposes, for my purposes with this exhibition, I contacted Peter and asked if he'd be willing to do another iteration of that project in the gallery space. And so in a few conversations that happened over coffee, but also in the studio, I'm giving you as much information as I can right now, because I understand that some of you are possibly, hopefully, maybe going to actually curate shows in your own locales, which is something that's very easy to do, and I highly recommend doing it. But so this is how it works out. I know Peter, obviously, but we met for a different reason, but we still know each other, and so it's still very casual. I didn't have to have there wasn't anything awkward about the interaction. So we meet for coffee. He says yes. Then we go to his studio and we hash everything out. And what we decided on was that we needed to have some measure, some monetary number that we could translate into the weight of gold, right? So this abstract number turns into something that's concrete, and is concrete in such a material that it is considered very, very economically valuable. That number, we decided, would have to have something to do with the space that the show is taking place within. And so I looked into the rent for the gallery space if someone from outside the community wanted to rent that space. And anyone who would like access to this gallery space has to have on hand $950. There's a $200 deposit that is refunded after the event, but for one day, this gallery is valued at $750. And so what I told Peter was that he could translate that number, this thing that's just written down somewhere on the internet, into a measure of quantifiable monetary value, because that's effectively what gold is, the gold standard and such. So, and I know the gold standard is a huge topic. I'm not talking about that in full, but I understand that it's a huge topic. So, I'm sidestepping that for the sake of brevity. So, Peter then acquired $950 worth of gold dust, and he released it into the space. He did it. We did a test run of it during installation. So actually, the day on April 2nd, because the show opened for installation on April 1st, and so he came in with this thing that's in his hand. You can see here that's actually an insecticide duster, and he sprayed a few pumps of gold. And let me tell you, $950 worth of gold is not that much. So he releases a little bit of this gold into the air, and then he leaves. The gold lingers in the air. During the opening, we restaged it. He came back in. We still had some gold left over, and he released more gold into the space during the opening reception so that people could see the gold lingering in the air. And these two shots, one is from installation, the one with where you can actually see Peter in the frame, and you can, if you look up right around here, right around here, that's the gold. And then on this side you can see it. This is when it's sprayed out, it's a fairly directed cloud of gold dust that projects into the space, but very quickly it dissipates. But gold in dust form is very, very light, and so it actually lingered in the space for about 15 to 20 minutes before slowly settling onto the floor, the table, the sculptural pedestals around. I will talk about one of the sculptures that we were very adamant about not getting any of the gold dust near, but that was for very specific reasons, which I'll talk about in just a moment. So in this instance, this show being a conversation on obsolescence, this sculpture is effectively going to be is going to have entirely disintegrated by the end of the show. It's going to be in the HVAC system of the gallery space. It's going to walk out of the gallery on the soles of people's feet. I'm going to have to sweep and mop the space at the end of this show in preparation for what is coming next. And so really it's gone. That valuation has effectively evaporated. And in the same way that the money that you would pay into this space also, it goes to paying other things, but it effectively evaporates. It's not easily quantifiable when you pay someone rent. That money, it goes to all these kind of abstract things that, not necessarily abstract, there's a roof over your head, that's not abstract, right? But it goes to all of these more structural things that people don't necessarily equate with economic value. Like, I'm sitting in here with a roof over my head and a floor below my feet, but I'm not constantly considering the monetary value of that or the walls that surround me. This is a sculptural work by Julia Wiest, who is actually an author in both senses of the term. She has written a novel, and it also makes sculptural works as well. Now, a little bit on the idea of obsolescence and why I wanted to have this conversation. When things obsolesce, they break down. Their use value slowly disintegrates or quickly disintegrates, and the need for another thing comes up. And so a lot of times when I'm speaking about the show shorthand, I talk about the idea of an iPod. An iPod, when you purchase this item, most people that have had one of these in the past understands that it has a shelf life of about 2 years before it starts breaking down, before the technical components begin to stop working, before it slows down and basically breaks itself down, right? But yet we still consider purchasing a new one, even though we know that new one is also going to break down. And so it's this kind of conundrum of the society that we live in right now, this late capitalist society. And I say that knowing full well that calling it late capitalism is kind of optimistic in that we think it's going to break down, but I don't really see it breaking down anytime soon. So maybe it's not late capitalism. Maybe we're still in early capitalism. Whatever. That's a total tangent. The idea of artwork as having a built-in mode of obsolescence is something that is often difficult to handle, because culturally, when we think about artwork, we think about older artworks that we can see in an institution, artworks that have a value that it goes beyond this sense of numbers, right? The Mona Lisa is a valuable artwork, but it's also a priceless artwork, meaning that it is so valuable and so far removed from its tournament of value when a commodity or a market exchange value is applied to it. And that's what Arjan Apadura brought up and I talked to you guys about a little bit ago. So we don't have any idea how much the Mona Lisa would be worth if it went on to auction, because it's so important. It's so historically valuable. It's so culturally valuable. It's so art historically valuable. It has all of these things that imbue it or add to its possible exchange value. But that exchange value is so hard to understand that we just refer to it as priceless. And so, when somebody uses the term priceless, that's actually what they mean. It's not that we couldn't come up with a price if we were pressed for it, because obviously we could, but in considering the object fully, it's difficult for us to come up with a price. By and large, priceless items are or fall into the category of cultural production, which is broadly covered in Pierre Bourdieu, and can very easily become more specific and whittled down to art practice. And so you have these art objects that are deemed priceless. And pricelessness is something that relies on all of these different systems of value that we're talking about through the course of this class. Now today's reading, or the readings for this week, deal with the idea of the museum, of the institution, and what that institution, how that institution creates value, and how the value created by that institution can and has been broken down by a generation of artists. When Douglas Crimp was writing, he's talking very specifically about artwork coming out of the 1980s and 1990s, right? Late 1970s, quite honestly, and forward. And so, sorry, I'm just turning to the page right now in the book. So this idea that artwork has this option of being priceless has always been really funny to me, because currently the market is this huge beast of a topic in cultural criticism right now, right? We are so invested in conversations about money that I felt that it was a germane topic to base at least part of a course in a graduate program on, was how money is structured inside of the marketplace that you are all going to go and enter into. That's such an important thing to talk about, so I felt compelled to. But one of the problems with having that conversation is it operates contrarily to the idea that we see art as culturally important as well. And so for Fred Wilson, when his work leaves his studio and goes into a private collection, inside of that collection it has a different sense of value. It's given a certain level of cultural importance, one that the artist can only be partially responsible for, because there's a reason why the person who purchased it is collecting it. There's a reason why they found it interesting, compelling, and more interesting than the idea of the money that they might have to spend on it. And so the reason why this project is called Within a Tournament of Value, I understand I'm kind of going on a few tangents here, and I'm sorry, but the reason why this project is called Within a Tournament of Value is because a tournament of value, as defined by Appadurai, is when an exchange value is applied to a work of art or an object. Like a cell phone comes out of a factory, it is sent from that factory to a retail location, and inside of that retail location it enters into a tournament of value that actually kind of extends a little bit before and a little bit after the retail store as a geographic location. But ultimately, when it's in there, there's an exchange number put on it, $200. and you give the $200, you take the phone, that phone is worth $200 in that exchange. But as that phone continues on in life, or as more specifically that art object continues forward in its life, I'm putting forth as a thinker and as the curator of the show that the object actually enters into a different kind of tournament of value. Once you get a cell phone, you start taking pictures, all of a sudden this little computer that's in your back pocket becomes a repository of your memories. It houses all of the people that you want to stay in touch with. And so this thing actually enters into a more personalized tournament of value, where it's imbued with all of the things, an emotional reality, a historical importance, a matter of interconnectivity between you and your peers, and it becomes something very specific. It becomes your phone. No longer are you thinking about the $200 that you spent on it. Instead, you're thinking about your acquiring of it, your filling it with meaning, which is easy to do with a cell phone because you literally put information into it. With an artwork, that brings us back to this notion of semiotics, which I've belabored, so I'm not going to talk about it anymore. And so all of these art objects, by having at some point established some semblance of a market value or an exchange value, enter into another tournament of value, and create these other ideas or elicit other ideas of how we value artwork. That was a lot of a conversation, and really what I want to boil it down to is all of these objects, as they obsolesce, as they break down, they are eliciting another sense of value. They're in a different tournament of value. As the gold dust dissipates, the monetary value is mooted. It's undermined by the fact that you cannot ever collect back the $950 worth of gold dust so as to go and exchange it for another $950 thing. Instead, it dissipates value. It creates a level of value within the entire space of its display, but it also creates a certain level of historical value in the remembrance of this show. Now, I've said all of this stuff while you have had these two images in front of you. One is of a broken glass sitting on top of a pedestal. The other is a glass that is almost full to the top, sitting on a pedestal. This work by Julia Wiest is comprised of one wine glass. When a collector purchases this wine glass, they are given explicit instructions. You may fill the wine glass to the top. You may then put that wine glass into the freezer. As the water freezes, it expands and breaks the glass, or ruptures the glass. The work of art is only complete when the object is taken out of the freezer, put on display, and allowed to melt. The melting of the ice works contrary to the structure of the ice and glass as one, right? So as the ice melts, the broken glass that is adhered to it falls apart. And so by the end of a duration of time, the glasses that we're using for this exhibition and the temperature of this space means that each of these glasses lasts for about 3 to 5 hours. In other iterations where the glasses were slightly smaller and the rooms were a little bit warmer, they lasted for about 2 to 3. Now I'm saying they because there's this little bit of a footnote with this work. The reason why this work is in this exhibition is because I'm taking all of these things from the perspective of the person who would actually exchange money for it, right? Somebody exchanges money with Peter for a measure of gold. Boom, gold is gone. The exchange value is gone. The option of trading this work on a secondary market is gone. it all evaporates. It all obsolesces. The collector here gets one go. He gets one glass. When the glass is done, the work is done. He has no option of secondary trading. He has no option of museum display or exchange. That's it. It's done. For the purposes of an exhibition, however, this work is allowed to be repeated, so that every person who enters the space has the experience of engaging with the ice in some part of its melting. And I'm purposely being a little bit frustrating here for your purposes by not showing you the big chunk of ice that actually sits in this broken glass at these cumbersome times. Instead, I'm showing you the immediately after it's pulled out of the freezer, before the ice begins to break, and after the ice has fully melted away, and we have this broken glass that sits on top of the pedestal. Now I'm going to talk a little bit later about something that's going on, a conversation between some of the works in the space that has created a really incredible and very specific environment within the gallery, but not yet. Here are two images of one work. The work is by Roman Ondak. It's a 2009 sculpture called Breath on Both Sides. And the idea is coming out of a line of conceptual art that was more or less started by Duchamp, but extended by this guy named Piero Manzoni. Now, I will say this, a little teaser for the summer. Over the summer, I'm giving, in the same way that I lectured to a unified class of both first and second years, I'm going to be lecturing in that same way this summer. I'm going to be giving you guys a short course on the history of 20th century art. So you will know who Piero Manzoni is. If you do not, I recommend doing a little Google search of him because he's interesting. But I don't want to talk that much about him because I've got a lot to talk about. So Ondak's work, he's interested in the way that the artist can make a decision and how that decision can affect the architecture of the space in which the art is installed. For a project at the Venice Biennale, what Mr. Ondak did was continued a walking path from the outside of the pavilion through the pavilion and out the back side of it. And so ostensibly, if someone was looking at their feet while going through a nice walk through a natural path, they would not ever understand that they had actually passed through a building. He's talking about the ephemeral aspects of architecture. We only sense architecture when we are inside or in being inside or outside of it. And there is this liminal possibility. It's a very, very, very thin line. It's kind of like the line I talked about last summer, the organic line of collage that Ligia Clark mentioned when two things are put next to each other. So as you move from the outside to the inside and then the inside back to the outside, you are effectively changing your interpretation of the architecture. So how do you freeze that? How do you capture that? And so in 2009, Ondak came up with this solution. What happens if myself as the artist, I'm speaking for him now, what happens if myself as the artist finds a way to create some sort of plastic thing, and I say plastic meaning that it's been manufactured, a plastic thing that can capture this moment of interiority versus exteriority. And so he decided, in a very whimsical solution, I think, to cut a small hole in the window of the building and then insert a latex balloon, or a balloon. I'm using latex. And then you inflate the balloon with your breath. The first iteration of this project was the breath of the artist. Every other iteration, this is an intellectual property piece. So I'm the one, these are two images of my breath appearing on both sides of the architecture. Now, how is this obsolescing, or what is this obsolescing? This work breaks down the architecture of the space. Every time this work is installed in a collector's home, the collector then has to replace the pane of glass. It's no longer effective. Now, granted, there's a little bit of poetry to the way it's presented, so the collector doesn't necessarily see that as that taxing, but most people in today's age, if their phone breaks, they don't feel that burdened by going out and buying a new one. And so in the same kind of fashion of conspicuous consumption, the collector buys a work of art, but then the work of art demands that the collector continue to replace aspects of their building. Now, this work actually is in a private collection. I am borrowing this work for my exhibition. I am borrowing it from a collector in Vancouver. I had a phone conversation with him where he told me that I had the rights to do this work and that he would not install this work in his home until the end of my exhibition. It's an intellectual property piece, which I said before, but that's what I mean by that. There are 3 copies of this work that exist in the world. One of them is in this guy's collection. I'm not going to give you his name. In this guy's collection in Vancouver. So if the other 2 are on public view, say in a collection in Europe and a collection in Southeast Asia, only 3 can ever exist, and so he cannot legally, or for the merit of the work as it exists in his collection, he doesn't want to show that work to a public, right? He wants it to actually be that the truth that he only has one. And so yes, here it is. 2 images of it. A breath on both sides. 2 years ago, Dana Sherwood produced a cake for an exhibition. The cake was meant to be destroyed from the inside out by a family of mice that had been installed in the cake. Now, a little bit of a humanitarian conversation here. The cake was not made the way that cakes for humans are made. It was made with a lot less sugar. It was made using ingredients that were designed for mice and their diet. And the center of the cake was actually hollowed out to create a nice little nest for them. And so basically this is a cage built out of mouse food for mice in the shape of what we would refer to as a decadent cake. The mice did not eat the whole cake because it's a big cake. The show didn't run for that long. They couldn't eat that much, right? At the end of the show, even though this work was supposed to obsolesce in its initial iteration, the decision was made to preserve it. It went from being a thing that should have been an emblem of a performance and transitioned into something that had historical merit. It was a marker of an event. It became an icon of a thing that happened in the past. Now, because of the way that biology works, it's still continuing to break down, although it's breaking down at a much slower rate, because when bread goes stale, it really has 2 options. It can get moldy and be consumed by small bacteria, or the mold itself, which is bacteria, or it can go stale and then slowly break down by the slow release of, I think it just releases oxygen at that point, but it also releases a little bit of moisture as well. That's what happens when things go stale. And so this thing that was merely a prop or a prop in a conceptual artwork has now become an artwork in and of itself. The value of this construction has changed. It went from being something that had a very specific use value to being something that had a different use value. We now look at this cake, we tell this story, I tell this story, and people see that there's evidence of mice having been in there. You can't see it in these pictures, but there are small droppings of those mice. There are these small bugs that have developed. We don't really know what those bugs are. And in a really weird and gross fashion, this lip down here, this like rectangular, I mean, here's a right angle here, here's like a little hint of a right angle, even though it's kind of upturned. Something waxy came out of this cake and lined the bottom of the box that it was preserved in. This thing was not put in a refrigerator. Let me say that. It was put in a storage unit. So it's still breaking down, but it's breaking down in such a slow rate, but that breaking down has become part of a much longer artwork than the artist initially had conceived of. So the obsolescence here is this work is presenting a different schedule of obsolescence. One that was supposed to be quick, and all of a sudden when it wasn't quick, there was a different tournament of value. It was no longer something that was meant for the bin, it was meant for the display later. And the mice were all taken care of. They went to their various other homes. But mice only have a 2-year life cycle anyway, and so all the mice that were initially in this cake are probably long since gone. From the collection of Daniel Fuller, curator at the ICA at the Maine College of Art, comes this work by printmaker Ryan McGinnis. Now, I refer to this show as a sculptural show, and I include this as one of the sculptures. Ryan McGinnis took an object that exists in the three-dimensional world, a dollar bill. It's an object, it's not a piece of paper. Money isn't even made of paper, right? So McGinnis then printed a coupon on the face of the dollar bill that said $1 off anything, anywhere. By doing that, I'm putting forth that he splintered the meaning of this object as an artwork authored by a man who has shown at the Museum of Modern Art, who is in the collection of a lot of esteemed institutions around the world, who's a very high-profile artist in his own right. This object has a lot of exchange value. It's still a print by this author, and it can occupy the same kind of normative conversation that artwork has, right? But for the brief moment that was out of its frame as we were reframing it for this exhibition, the dollar existed again as that three-dimensional object. And the artist's intervention onto that object, the mere screen printing of the coupon, calls into question the way that we engage with dollar bills. It actually kind of redefines the value of the dollar. Is the dollar anything more than a coupon? Is currency anything more than a coupon? How do we rectify those two things when they're fused so explicitly into one object? More than obsolescing in its own right, this object puts forth a lot of an interesting and necessary aspect to the conversation at hand. When people talk about valuation, they want to talk about money. And so in this show, we can talk about money in two ways. Money in the very standardized gold format, or money in the equally as standardized exchange format, where it takes the shape of a dollar bill. Now, the last work by the last artist's project here is one that is a little, I think, the most graphic in its explanation of the faults of the value system as we have put it forth. It's also sad, it's also really pretty. So, painted lady butterflies have a life cycle as a winged insect. There are other aspects to a butterfly's life cycle, right? With wings, a painted lady butterfly can last for about 10 days. That means that they are only alive for 10 days. Dana Sherwood, the same artist who's responsible for the cake, wanted to, in having this conversation about opulence and opulence that comes with a time clock, opulence that has in it an air of obsolescence, she came up with the idea, or put forth the reality that butterflies are actually a commodity. And when you purchase a butterfly, a living butterfly, you're doing so almost as though you're buying confetti. These things are purchased so that they can be released at ceremonies like weddings. They're not. You can't keep them as a pet. There's no longevity there. They only exist for 10 days, and so you're given explicit instructions when you open the box. And these came in a box. They were ordered on the internet. It's like, this is how you care for them. Give them this solution so that they can eat. Give them sun lamps or direct sunlight, and then just know that they're going to die. Thank you for your purchase. Goodbye. And so in the same way that, when you buy that iPod or that phone, you basically understand that it's going to break apart, but yet you still are happy with the purchase. And even though that thing's going to break apart and all you're going to do is throw it out and get a new one, or not even though, but that's the way we deal with technology. That's the way we deal with most objects that fall into the category of conspicuous consumption. What happens here, however, is the slow reality that these butterflies are alive and are then no longer alive. And I can say personally that being in a space with all of these little things slowly eking out their existence is really, really sad. And it actually calls into brings into focus a lot of the faults with the other kinds of commodity exchanges that exist in our world. This collection of living creatures put on view as objects obsolescent is, for me, the most vicious critique of a capitalist system that I wanted to entertain inside of this environment. I think it speaks to the kind of opulent, whimsical, luxurious aesthetic that the show occupies, but also brings in a lot of very harsh realities about the way that we engage with money systems and the way that conspicuous consumption is taxing us in the abstract. Now, lastly, before we move on to the next one, and this is going to be a long lecture because last week's lecture was like a drop in the hat. These two pictures, if you look really closely, you're going to see little dots of gold. On the left-hand side, we have the balloon for Ondak's work with faint dustings of gold. And then on the right is a picture in raking light of the water that has dissipated from the glass of Julia Weist's project. Now, when Peter sprayed the gold dust into the space, some of it landed on the pedestal, some of it landed on the sculptures. With Weist's work, the conversation continues, however. Every day that a new glass is put on the pedestal, that the glass breaks, the ice melts, that melted ice, that water, pushes the gold dust around. And so there is this kind of aura surrounding the space of that pedestal, of that sculpture, that has this lovely, constantly evolving shape of gold dust on the floor. It brings very clearly into focus the way that these sculptural objects are actually in conversation with each other. That's the goal of a well-curated show, that the curator can write this catalog essay, but that the objects in conversation with each other are going to do a lot to convey the sense of meaning that the curator is thinking about, but also that the artists are wanting to engage with. And so these are two examples of what I think are kind of the reason why you curate. It's the same reason why people why they DJ. They want it to be, they want all of the things that they pull together for their DJ set or for their art exhibition to create a cohesive idea, but also work kind of in harmony with each other. So obviously there are sculptures and conversation pieces that deal with this topic that are not in the show. And they're not in the show because I had a very specific aesthetic in mind, and I wanted to have almost a very minimal approach to this conversation. The response to this has been very interesting. People have picked up on the ideas very, very quickly, which is lovely and ideal. People have said that it's a very poppy show, which I agree with. Pop in the traditional sense that it's a critique of the market, but it's also a very minimal show. So there's these real nice, art historical reference points that are buried in there. So that is one show. That's the show that I just opened up in New York City, and it's fun. It's fun, guys. Next, however, I want to talk to you about a project that I put together with my husband, John Sunling, in Portland, Maine, at Rose Contemporary, which is a gallery on Congress Street that is actually no longer a gallery on Congress Street. Sad as that is. Last summer, right around the end of our time together, I think it opened 2 weeks or a week after our course ended. We put together this show that was basically, it was the initial opportunity for the Institute for American Art to present itself in a public space, like a traditionally public space. And so what we decided to do, here's some press information. You can see this is when we opened, the 12th to the 23rd, so it was days after our final, our term ended last summer. And you can see that I was open every day as well. That's kind of my MO when I do these projects in the public. And this is the press release, but it was also we projected this in the space and allowed audiences that passed by to read it. And so I'll read it for you right now. Institute for American Art at Rose Contemporary Gallery, August 12th-August 23rd. On public view, at a pace of one object a day, will be a collection of items gained by those at the Institute for American Art through gift exchange and cultural grazing. These are things that we have chosen to keep, and importantly, that which we have chosen to display in our home. Now we wish to share some of these with you. They include a birthday present, an engagement present, a Christmas present, a beach find, a work of art, a party favor, an assignment, a criticism, a painting, a gift, an incidental piece of paper, an alley find, and a thing a relocating friend was shedding. This collection is disparate, containing objects from family and friends, sidewalks and waterways. They have been both found and given. Our hope is that by distilling your engagement, we can enhance your study of these things. We want to share with you the subtlety of these objects. Each one presents a nuanced look at what we like and the aesthetics that we privilege. I'm saying we, meaning those at the Institute for American Art, meaning those people that live inside my home, meaning my husband and myself. By putting on view these objects, the Institute for American Art is seeking to venerate them, open them up for examination, and ultimately, this is important, allow them the ability to get the recognition we think they deserve. Given the commercial nature of the space in which the show is held, we want to allow these objects to enter the market. We have attached valuation to each thing that corresponds with the emotional associations which we have developed or embedded within. This number represents the lowest possible sum for which we would part with these objects. We maintain the right to stop any sale should the emotionality overwhelm us. There will be a catalog of all the objects on view at the gallery. Please return daily to see what new object you can examine. Kind regards. So, this is this is one of the objects. This is the object that a relocating friend was shedding. On the left-hand side, you can see a photograph that was taken in the Institute for American Art in preparation for the catalog that was produced for this exhibition. In the center, you can see an installation shot taken from the street so that you can notice the window pane and the darkened exterior. So this was taken at night, obviously. And on the far right, we have an installation shot taken from inside and just a few feet away from the object. So this object, here, I'll just keep going a little bit. This is the Institute. This is the website front piece, and this is my ad for it. Excuse me. We're going to go back here for a second. So the idea that we would put these things in the market was structural. I have expressed a level of zero interest in selling artworks through the Institute. It's my house. There are legal stipulations with how I can sell things out of my home. And ultimately, I'm not interested in associating monetary value with the objects that I bring into my space. That's not why I bring them into my space. But that's specific to the space that the Institute is within, which is my home. When the Institute was asked to do a project in a commercial space, there was a very pointed conversation among the Institute and some close friends about whether or not these objects should be allowed for sale. And ultimately, it was decided that yes, they should. But as the press release says, that value wasn't marked by any kind of financial rubric. Instead, it was specifically the emotional weight that the object had within our marriage, within our life. All of these objects are things that John and myself have collected from people that we care about, or collected in situations that we found appealing. You know, a walk on the beach, found a piece of rope. Going to a friend's house as they're clearing things out, found this object. And so the emotional value was so high for a lot of these objects that they were priced astronomically. Several years before this exhibition, my husband made me a hand-knitted quilt, or hand-knitted Afghan, excuse me. And this Afghan was made at a time before we were married, when we were still living in New York City, and because it was so important to me, I knew that if I sold it, it would have to be priced extremely high. The quilt was for sale at $8 million. I would sell it for $8 million, but I would not sell it for any less. I understand full well that I still have a connection with the person who made it. We have the ability, with time and energy, to remake the thing if need be. But that goes counter to the emotional reality that this is a thing that was made for me by someone that I cared about and has stayed with me as we have changed our relationship over time. So here I was very pointedly having a conversation about the way that objects enter into these spaces. This idea of a pricing schedule is something that makes sense to dealers and to gallerists and that arena. But when bringing things out of a home environment, specifically things that have been handmade, things that have been gifted, none of these things were purchased. So, you know, that it changes things, and the pricing schedule was one that was based on a rubric that I didn't necessarily want to have some sort of financial conversation with other artworks. An $8 million Afghan is probably the most expensive thing to ever be put on view in Portland, Maine. Quite honestly, I mean, think of Aquasisco. They're not selling works for $8 million. Nobody is selling works for $8 million in a retail space like a gallery. They might be doing it in private deals. there are people with money throughout the state, right? But for us, there was no way I could sell it for any less. And that's the nature of this show. It was a critique of the market and a critique of the gallery system, but I was using a structure that was created inside of our space. Now, I do want to talk a little bit about this idea of curating as valuation, especially as you guys finish this lecture and start reading the Grant McCracken text that is also linked here, which is a very quick read. It's only a few pages, so I trust you guys can get through it easily. The idea that someone who collects these things so somebody collects these things, right? And in collecting these objects, they imbue them with a sense of meaning. And this is what Fred Wilson was getting at. You know, when the object is in his studio, it means one thing, but when it moves from that studio into a collector's home, it becomes something different. The meaning slightly changes because there's a different voice telling the story. There's a different narrative explained around the object. And so what I'm showing you here is an installation shot of a museum in Britain called the John Soane House, or the Sir John Soane House, or the Sir John Soane Museum. What Soane did back in the day, back in 17 and change into 18 and change, or maybe 18 and change into 19 and change. I can't remember the specific dates, but it's irrelevant. He went and did the thing that most aristocratic Europeans did, which was a grand tour, where he went through Rome and Greece and found all of these objects, these architectural interest objects, and brought them back to his home in Britain. At a certain point in the history of his home, it was turned into a museum. And so these objects went from being objects of interest for a tourist on vacation and were turned into objects of close study. Now, they were objects of close study before the house was a museum, obviously, because when you bring something home from vacation, you look at it, you turn it around, and you study it. Soane was an architect, and so he looked at these things and as fodder for future projects. Even though he didn't actually build many buildings, architect was what he was. I don't really know what he did, but I know he was an architect. He built his home. But then, so he studies them, and then he opens his house to the public and allows the public to study them, and all of a sudden, that thing that was just, some Roman craftsperson made a stucco tile and put it on a building as part of his day job, and he walked away. And then 100 or 1,000 years later, some English guy comes in, finds that thing, and says, "Wow, that's amazing! I'm going to take that home with me." And it sits on his desk, or in this instance, on his wall, and he stares at it for a while, and then he thinks about it for a while, and he imbues this thing with meaning and value, and creates a different narrative for this object, right? But then Sir John Soane passes away, his home is turned into a museum, and then other people are allowed to come in. And no longer are they seeing the handiwork of a Roman craftsperson. They're seeing the handiwork of a Roman craftsperson that was collected by a British man in this specific period that is now on view in this very specific kind of institution. This isn't at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It isn't at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. It's not in the Smithsonian. You walk into a townhouse off a park near the Holborn stop in downtown London. You walk into a domestic setting and you find all of these things. And so they're not in this instance, these objects are displayed in such a way that it seems almost to mimic museum display. But in this room of the house, Soane displays a collection of I'm forgetting his name, Hogarth paintings, excuse me. He has a large collection of paintings by an 18th century, early 19th century British painter named William Hogarth. You walk into this, and here's a drawing made from the inside of the space when it was still a domestic home. On the right-hand side, and on the left, you can see one of the caretakers of the museum contemporarily with white gloves opening these folding walls. And yes, it's crazy and awesome cool that there are these walls that open up, and you can see in this drawing here that there's this one sculpture here, there's this one sculpture here. You can also see a little bit of a hyperbole. There's 1, 2, 3 picture bays here, whereas there, in actuality, there's only one. There's only ever been one. There's not the hinges to support these other 3. But this is somebody saying, like, holy moly, look at what this guy's picture collection can do. Anyway, so you walk into this domestic setting and you engage with the artwork in a way that's different than you would in a home that had just one picture above the couch, let's say, or a museum that had multiple pictures like this. All of these different things around the table, the chair, the rug, in the contemporary instance, this man who's not a security guard but not a curator, kind of the one and the same. All of these things contribute to the way that we interact with the works. My imagination allows me to think that when you walked into John Soane's domestic sphere, you could probably get a lot closer than you could with these security guards around. You would also value it very differently. You're in the home of someone that you are friendly with. You've been invited into that space, and so you have this very casual relationship with that person, the objects in their collection, the space of their collection. Whereas now you walk into a museum and you are greeted by people in blazers, you give a small donation in exchange for a small catalog, and you wander through a space that you are not familiar with, that you are not comfortable in. And so it becomes a museum because of its distance from your lived reality. Whereas even if someone was still living there and it was a private home and it was filled with all of these antique goodies, it would still feel a bit like you were in the room with John Soane. On the left here is an interior of one of the other rooms in the Soane house. This is on the parlor floor, so right as you walk in the door. And on the right we have a painting by William Merritt Chase, who, this is inside of his studio. And so on the couch is a self-portrait, and then he has a sitter with him and this dog down on the bottom, on the floor. But this isn't the studio the way that the studios I've been in. The studios I've been in have white walls, and they look a lot like the Mega Painting Studios. But what Chase was interested in as an artist was the same thing that Soane was interested in. Presenting a public space, or a space that was both public and private, I guess is probably the better way to say that. A space that was available to entertain a public, even though it was kind of cordoned off from the everyman of the larger Johnny public, let's call it that. But inside of these spaces, he wanted to display the fact that he had been places, he had seen things, he had acquired certain things and brought them back. Now for Soane, it was about kind of flaunting the fact that he, like all the other architects in Britain, had been to these places and seen the Parthenon. And you can't take back the Parthenon, but you can take back that little piece of column that's down by your feet, right? For Chase's perspective, he's interested in having his clients realize that he is a worldly artist. He's an artist who has seen things, who has collected things, and can exhibit a dexterity in the way that he paints based on those parts of the world that he has experienced. This, of course, brings in the Salon de Fleurs of Gertrude Stein and Alice B. Toklas. Gertrude Stein is sitting in the comfier chair on the right-hand side, and Alice B. Toklas is sitting in an awkwardly low chair. I don't know why she's sitting in that awkwardly low chair, but whatever. On the left-hand side. And you can see surrounding them are all these artworks, Cubist artworks, Post-Impressionist artworks. They collected their friends, and they collected artists that they liked, and therefore became their friends in Paris. And the salon was, like Chase's studio, was not open to Johnny public, but it was available for people who were coming to Paris from New York. Artists who wanted to come and see Paris were often instructed that they should go and meet Stein and Toklas. They should go and see the salon, talk about the new painting styles that exist in Paris and in Europe more broadly, and that they can use this experience as a learning experience. And so, Sohn, Chase, Stein, and Toklas all have different agendas with how they present work in their homes or in their comfort zones, as it were. But all of them understood that being in this space, it was both public and private. It was both domestic and non-domestic. And it engaged with a broader sense of cultural valuation. And that's knowing all of this, thinking about all this stuff, has led me to do these projects inside of my space. So here's me giving the toast on the launch of the Institute last November, or 2 Novembers ago. And on the side is me starting a conversation that would lead to some reading, a reading that happened in my space. And so here we have a conversation about objects as they exist as things searching for signification, right? I'm bringing in objects oftentimes from collectors' homes or from the artist's studio that have a specific value and meaning associated with them. And when I put those things on view in a private space, a domestic sphere, that is open to a public, but that public is not Johnny public. It's a very specific public. Technically it is open to everybody, but not everybody's going to be interested in coming. That's what I mean. I don't turn people away at the door. I let anyone can come in, but not everybody wants to come in. And by showing those works in this place, I've realized that the audience engages with it very differently than they would other art viewing establishments. There's no hesitation to asking questions about the work. There's no hesitation to asking for a personalized story of how the work engaged with my space, how it entered into the Institute, and all of this kind of broader stuff. And so when thinking about the idea of curating, whether it's curating a show for a nonprofit space like within a Tournament of Value here at Flux Factory, or it's curating one object into my private home under the auspices of the Institute for American Art, every time that happens, there's a different meaning applied to the object, and not necessarily the object. I said that incorrectly. There's a different meaning that's imbued in the exchange between the object and the viewer. We have a different experience of those things because a domestic setting charges things in a very specific way, in the same sense that a white cube charges things in its own very specific way. Now, this whole conversation about historical value, where you see artworks, how we understand history, is where Douglas Crimp and his conversation about the museum or the institution comes into play. What he's dealing with is more specifically how it relates to studio practice. What happens at the quote-unquote at an end of history? what happens when the museums crumble and you have this littering of meaning and free signs just lying around to pick up and play with. Not free signs, free signifieds, looking for signification, just lying around. So that's the thing, that the essay that I think is going to best parlay into your practices or your understanding of what you do in your studio as it relates to this conversation. But the Fred Wilson and the Grant McCracken, which you're going to have available now, that is much more a sense of the kind of sociological, anthropological conversations that are happening in these art viewing spaces. And so with that, yeah, cool. We're done.